At dawn, the city breathed like it always did. Loud, impatient, hungry for winners. Neon signs faded, while street vendors wiped counters slick with last night's grease. In a narrow apartment above a closed bar, Grace Holloway woke before her alarm. Heart already racing, palms damp, mind heavy with numbers she could not escape. Rent overdue. Power bill blinking red. Her mother's clinic fees stacked like unpaid promises. Grace rolled from the mattress, pulled on jeans, and swallowed cold coffee left from yesterday. Tasting regret and resolve together, she worked 2 jobs in a dream she never spoke aloud. By morning, she stocked shelves at a beauty store downtown, ranging luxury foundations and lip colors priced higher than her weekly pay. By night, she cleaned offices, polishing glass walls that reflected other people's success. Customers smiled at her advice, thanked her for shade matches, then walked away carrying bags she could never buy. Grace learned the language of aspiration. The way confidence could be sold in ounces and shades. The way hope could be bottled. On the bus she studied faces, memorizing moods, building stories. She watched women measure themselves against mirrors and men measure time against money. Somewhere between stops, she promised herself she would not stay invisible forever. That promise felt foolish and necessary. The city rewarded neither kindness nor patience. But Grace carried both like tools. At the store, her manager, Linda Moore, reminded everyone about sales targets and brand loyalty. Grace listened, nodded, smiled. She moved fast, kept the shelves perfect, remembered every return policy. A new campaign played on the screen, glossy models, flawless skin, a global beauty empire selling belonging. Grace felt the pull and the sting. She loved the craft, the chemistry, the stories behind textures and tones. She hated the gatekeeping. During lunch, she ate a cheeseburger on the steps, grease soaking the paper, watching black sedans glide past. She checked her phone and saw a missed call from an unknown number. No voicemail. She shrugged it off. Unknown numbers often meant trouble. A memory rose without warning, sharp as glass. Her mother's voice years ago whispering about a man who never stayed, a life cut short by pride and silence. Grace had learned not to ask. Some doors, her mother said, cost too much to open. The past lived like a shadow, present but unnamed. Back inside, a customer complained about a delayed shipment. Grace apologized, offered solutions, absorbed the anger. She knew how to hold other people's frustration without breaking. When the shift ended, Linda pulled her aside, praising her numbers, hinting at a promotion that never arrived. Grace thanked her anyway. Gratitude was cheaper than honesty. At dusk, the city sharpened. Traffic snarled. Sirens stitched the air. Grace headed to her second job, mopping floors beneath logos of power. In a glass conference room, she paused, staring at her reflection multiplied. For a moment she imagined a different life, one where decisions carried weight and her name opened doors. The thought embarrassed her, then steadied her. Her phone vibrated again. Same unknown number. This time, a text appeared. Please call me. It's about your family. Signed, Carter and Wells. Attorney's Grace stood still. The mop dripped. The building hummed. Family meant debts, not miracles. Lawyers meant loss, not gifts. She typed a reply, erased it, typed again. The city did not wait, but something had begun to move. She felt it in her chest, a quiet warning, a promise she did not yet understand. Whatever waited on the other end of that call would change the math of her life, and the city watching would demand a price. Outside. Rain began, thin and stubborn, washing the sidewalks without apology. Grace stepped into it, jacket open, thoughts loud. She remembered every sacrifice, every promise broken by circumstance. Somewhere high above, offices glowed, decisions forming. She did not know why her hands shook, only that fear and hope had finally met. Tonight she would call back. Tonight the past would answer. And tomorrow, whether she wanted it or not, the city would learn her name. That truth would arrive soon, heavy, undeniable, reshaping loyalty, pride, survival, and freedom for her alone. Grace waited until midnight before returning the call. The city was quieter then, honest in a way daylight never allowed. She sat on the edge of her mattress, phone heavy in her hand, listening to her own breathing like a countdown. When the line connected, a man spoke with the calm of someone used to being believed. Ms. Holloway. Thank you for calling back. My name is Thomas Wells. I represent an estate that concerns your late grandfather. The word grandfather hit her like a wrong note. Grace closed her eyes. You have the wrong person, she said, steady by habit. I don't have one. There was a pause, respectful, practiced. You do. His name was Raymond Holloway. Silence filled the room. Outside, a bus sighed at the corner. Grace's thoughts scattered. Her mother had never said that name. She had said he left, and don't ask, and we survived. Raymond Holloway felt like a story told to someone else. I don't know what you want, Grace said. Not what Wells replied. What he wanted, explained in clean sentences, careful not to sound impossible. Raymond Holloway had passed 3 weeks earlier. His holdings were extensive. There was a will. Grace was named. There were conditions. There would be a meeting. Tomorrow. Downtown. 10 a.m. Grace laughed once, sharp and brief. I have work. We can arrange documentation, Wells said. This is time sensitive. After the call ended, Grace stared at the cracked ceiling until sleep came in pieces. Dreams carried a city within a city, towers of glass over markets and music, hands reaching, hands pulling away. She woke before dawn, heart racing, certainty thin but growing. At the beauty store, Linda noticed her distraction. You good? She asked, scanning inventory. Grace nodded. Family thing. Linda softened. Take the day. Don't make it a habit. Grace thanked her and left, pulse loud. She wore her best jacket, the one with a repaired seam, and rode the bus downtown. The law office sat above a cafe that smelled like fried chicken and sweet tea. Ordinary. That steadied her. Inside, the walls held photographs of charity galas and skyline sunsets. Thomas Wells greeted her with a handshake and a folder thick with paper. Another woman waited at the table, tailored suit, eyes assessing. This is Naomi Price, Wells said. Executor for Raymond Holloway's estate. Naomi smiled without warmth. You look younger than I expected. Grace ignored the comment. Wells slid documents forward. Numbers leaped off the page, impossible, insulting in their size. A beauty empire. Manufacturing, retail, licensing, global distribution. A valuation that made Grace dizzy. I don't understand, she said. Why me? Naomi's eyes flickered. That's not our concern, Wells explained the conditions. Grace would inherit controlling interest after a 6-month evaluation period. She would assume an interim role at the company's headquarters. Performance benchmarks would be assessed. If she failed, the holdings would transfer to a trust with external leadership. If she succeeded, the empire would be hers. Why the test? Grace asked. Wells hesitated. Naomi answered. Your grandfather believed character reveals itself under pressure. Grace thought of her mother working double shifts of learning resilience before comfort. What about my mother? She asked. Naomi's jaw tightened. She declined involvement. Another omission. Another door closed. After the meeting, Grace stepped back into the city, stunned. She sat at the cafe, ordered pancakes and eggs, ate slowly. Wealth tasted unreal. She called her mother, voicemail again. She left a message that said nothing. The company headquarters rose like a verdict. Inside, people watched her badge, whispered. She felt the weight of unfamiliar attention. A board member brushed past, muttering about optics. Grace cataloged faces, learning the terrain. Power moved quietly, often sideways. That afternoon, she met Ethan O. That name is banned. Use another. She met Jordan Reed, head of operations, polite, distant. He spoke of supply chains and margins, of brand trust and market share. Grace listened, asked questions that surprised him. Knowledge was currency. She spent carefully. As the day ended, Naomi pulled her aside. This world will test you, she said. Don't mistake courtesy for loyalty. Grace nodded. She had learned that lesson early. That night, alone again. Grace opened the folder and saw a handwritten note tucked inside. You remind me of your mother when she decided to leave. Don't disappoint yourself. RH, the city outside hummed, expectant. Grace felt the first true tremor of fear and something brighter. The test had begun. Someone had set the rules to watch her fail. She decided then she would not. The past had reached out. She would answer on her own terms. Grace learned quickly that power never announced itself. It moved through calendars, meetings scheduled without her name, decisions framed as suggestions. On her first official morning at the headquarters, she arrived early, ordered scrambled eggs and toast from the cafeteria, and watched the building wake up. The walls gleamed. The elevators whispered. People carried confidence like a tailored coat. Jordan Reed briefed her on operations. He spoke with care, choosing neutral words, careful not to offer allegiance. Supply contracts are stable, he said. Marketing is strong in urban markets. The board wants reassurance. Reassurance of what? Grace asked. That you're serious? Jordan replied. She nodded. Seriousness could be learned. Integrity could not. In the executive suite, she met Claire Benson, head of brand partnerships, whose smile arrived before her eyes. Claire praised Grace's story as inspiring, talked about opportunity and alignment, then suggested a press tour that centered emotion over competence. People love a comeback, Claire said, especially when it's simple. Grace heard the trap. Simple stories sold better than complicated truths. I prefer substance, she said. Let the work speak. Claire's smile thinned. Of course, by midweek, whispers followed Grace through hallways. Some admired her grit. Others resented her presence. Naomi Price observed from a distance, offering no protection. At lunch, Grace ate fried chicken and mashed potatoes alone, scrolling through internal reports. She found discrepancies in vendor pricing, contracts renewed without review. Patterns formed, money leaked where oversight slept. A flashback cut in, uninvited. Her mother at a kitchen table, counting bills, choosing which to pay. Watch the small numbers, she'd said. They tell the truth. Grace requested audits. The requests were delayed. Meetings rescheduled. Jordan warned her quietly. You're stepping on toes. Then they should move, Grace said. That afternoon a reporter called, citing anonymous sources questioning Grace's qualifications. The article framed her as a symbolic heir, a feel-good story masking inexperience. The board convened an emergency session. Claire spoke first, voice smooth. Optics matter. We need to protect shareholder confidence. Grace listened, heart steady. She presented data, clear and concise, highlighting inefficiencies and growth opportunities rooted in community trust and product transparency. She spoke of loyalty built through respect, not spectacle. Some nodded. Others stared at their phones. After the meeting, Jordan caught up to her. Be careful, he said. They're testing you. So am I, Grace replied. That evening, Grace met her mother at a diner near the freeway. Meatloaf, green beans, cornbread. The food grounded her. Her mother looked older than Grace remembered, worry etched deep. Grace told her about the inheritance. Silence followed. I tried to protect you, her mother said finally. Raymond was a storm. He loved control more than people. Why didn't you tell me? Grace asked. Because he would have found you sooner, her mother said. And you weren't ready. Grace reached across the table, squeezed her hand. I am now. The next morning, Betrayal arrived neatly packaged. An internal memo circulated announcing a reorganization that stripped Grace of direct oversight on key divisions. Naomi had approved it. Claire had drafted it. The board framed it as support. Grace stood in her office, memo shaking slightly in her hand. This was the test. Not numbers. Not press. Trust, she called Jordan. Who benefits? She asked. He hesitated. Claire and the interim CFO, Mark Ellis. Grace thanked him and hung up. She reviewed contracts late into the night, ordering pizza, mapping influence. Mark Ellis had ties to a competitor circling like a patient predator. Claire's partnerships funneled fees to shell vendors. Grace assembled a small team people overlooked, loyal to craft over credit. She shared her plan: transparency, audits, direct communication, leaks. They agreed, eyes bright with risk. Foreshadowing settled in her chest, heavy and certain. Someone would try to end this fast. She wrote a letter to herself, a habit from lean years. Choose courage over comfort, at dawn. She sent notices initiating full compliance reviews. Phones rang. Doors closed. Naomi requested a meeting. Grace declined and sent a calendar invite instead. Public, recorded. The city watched again, curious. Grace stood at the window, coffee cooling, reflections steady. Smiles hid knives. She would not flinch. The Empire tested her resolve. She answered with truth sharpened into action. The counterattack came disguised as concern. Naomi Price requested a private meeting first thing Monday. Her tone measured, her calendar suddenly flexible. Grace arrived with notes, not armor. The room felt colder than the hallway, the kind of cold that lived in polished surfaces and polite smiles. "You're moving too fast," Naomi said, folding her hands. "Audits unsettle markets." "Markets settle for truth," Grace replied. "Uncertainty grows where silence lives." Naomi studied her, eyes weighing options. "You were given a path," she said. "Don't mistake permission for authority." Grace heard the threat beneath the lesson. "Authority follows accountability," she said. "I'm accountable." Naomi ended the meeting with a warning framed as advice. Grace left and found the locks on her access changed. A subtle demotion. The building hummed as if nothing had happened. The city rewarded composure. By noon, a leak hit the blogs. Screenshots of internal emails cropped to imply incompetence. The comments were cruel and fast. Grace shut her office door, breathed, and called her mother. No answer. She texted Jordan instead. "We expected this," she wrote. "Proceed." Her team met after hours in a windowless room. Pizza boxes, notepads, tired eyes. They mapped influence lines and found the breakpoints. The interim CFO's contracts were vulnerable. Claire's partnerships lacked disclosures. Grace assigned tasks, trusted people with pieces, not secrets. Loyalty grew where respect was real. A flashback surfaced, warm and sharp. Grace at 14, defending a classmate from ridicule, taking the hit so someone else could breathe. Courage had always cost her. She paid anyway. The next day, Grace requested a full board session, open minutes recorded. Naomi objected. Grace cited policy. The session went live internally. Grace presented evidence calmly, naming no villains, showing only numbers. The room shifted. Some members leaned forward. Others stiffened. Mark Ellis interrupted, voice smooth. "This is irresponsible." Grace met his eyes. "Irresponsible is paying above market rates to undisclosed vendors," she said. "Here's the comparison." Silence spread. Mark's face tightened. Claire tried to redirect toward branding narratives. Grace returned to governance. The vote to suspend select contracts passed narrowly. Naomi's gaze cooled. That evening, Grace found her apartment door ajar. Nothing stolen, papers disturbed. A message without words. Fear spiked, then settled into resolve. She changed locks, called a friend, slept in fragments. The following week, Jordan resigned publicly, citing personal reasons. Privately, he warned Grace, "They're isolating you." Grace thanked him and promoted from within, choosing competence over comfort. She hosted a town hall, spoke plainly about values, answered hard questions. Employees responded with applause that felt earned. Trust, once extended, returned multiplied. Then the call came that cut deepest. The clinic had raised fees. Her mother's condition had worsened. Grace sat in her car, knuckles white, fighting the urge to quit the fight and pay the price quietly. She remembered her promise. Freedom was not a check. It was a stance. At the end of the month, Naomi convened a closed session without Grace. She learned after the fact. Rage flared, then cooled. She requested the minutes. They refused. Grace filed a formal challenge. The legal clock began. Foreshadowing pressed close. This would end in public or bloodless defeat. Grace chose public. She scheduled a press briefing. Limited, factual. She spoke of accountability, of modern leadership, of inclusive growth grounded in transparency. She did not plead. She invited scrutiny. The response surprised them. Analysts praised clarity. Employees shared stories of regained trust. Sales stabilized. The city noticed that night. Grace received an envelope slipped under her door. Inside, a photograph of her mother with a man she recognized only from a name she had avoided. Raymond Holloway, younger, softer, holding a promise he never kept. A note followed in careful script. The truth will cost you. Are you ready? Grace folded the note, steady hands. She was ready to pay, because the cost of standing still was higher. Betrayal had sharpened her. Love anchored her. The test moved toward its center, and she would not look away. Grace did not sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with the photograph laid flat between her palms, studying details she had missed before the relaxed tilt of Raymond Holloway's shoulders. The way her mother's smile looked unguarded, almost young. This was not the storm her mother had described. Or maybe it was just earlier, before damage became legacy. At dawn, Grace drove to the clinic. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. Her mother looked smaller in the hospital bed, pride dimmed, but not gone. Grace placed the photo on the blanket without a word. Her mother closed her eyes. A long breath. I hoped you'd never see that. Why lie to me? Grace asked, voice steady, heart not. I didn't lie, her mother said. I survived. The story came in pieces like broken glass reassembled. Raymond Holloway had loved ambition more than family. When Grace's mother refused to become a secret, refused to raise a child in shadows, she left. Raymond offered money. She refused that too. Pride met pride. Silence followed. He watched you, her mother said. From a distance, paid for things anonymously. When he got sick, he tried to make amends the only way he knew control. Grace absorbed the truth, anger cooling into clarity. Why the test? Because he didn't trust himself, her mother replied. Or anyone. Back at headquarters, the pressure intensified. Naomi's legal challenge moved fast, aiming to disqualify Grace on procedural grounds. Mark Ellis resigned abruptly, leaving chaos behind. Claire went quiet, dangerous and restrained. Grace's team uncovered the final piece, a clause buried in the will. If Grace exposed governance failures publicly, she would forfeit personal dividends but retain control. If she chose silence, she would profit privately while the system stayed intact. Raymond's last lesson. Character over comfort. The decision weighed heavy. She could secure her mother's care, erase fear with money, or she could change the rules and risk everything. A flashback surfaced. Grace as a child, giving away her lunch to someone hungrier. Some choices wrote themselves. She called a press conference. Grace stood at the podium, city lights sharp behind her. She spoke plainly about findings, reforms, accountability. She disclosed her own forfeiture, named the clause. Invited oversight. Gasps rippled, then quiet respect. Markets reacted, volatile but honest. Naomi's challenge collapsed under scrutiny. Board votes shifted. Claire resigned days later, statement careful, incomplete. Employees flooded internal channels with relief. The brand stabilized, then strengthened. At that clinic, Grace paid the bills quietly through a foundation. No headlines. Her mother squeezed her hand. You chose freedom, she said. The city responded in its language. Numbers, trust, time. Grace learned to carry power without flinching. She rebuilt divisions with leaders who earned loyalty. She ate fried chicken with teams, listened more than she spoke. The empire began to look different, feel different. One evening, alone in the office, Grace opened a final letter from Raymond, dated weeks before his death. If you read this, you chose yourself. I am proud in the way I never learned to say, do better than I did. Grace folded the letter, placed it in a drawer. Pride loosened its grip. Redemption did not erase harm, but it redirected its force. Outside, City breathed, watching another name earn its weight. The test neared its end, but the work had just begun. Success did not arrive with applause. It arrived with consequences. 3 weeks after the press conference, Grace sat in the executive boardroom, facing a different kind of silence. The numbers on the screen were stronger than analysts predicted, but the tension had not lifted. Power, she was learning, never forgave exposure. It waited. A coalition of minority shareholders filed suit, claiming Grace's disclosures damaged short-term value. The case was thin but loud. News cycles fed on it. Commentators questioned whether morality belonged in markets. Grace watched the debate with a steady face, then turned back to work. Noise passed. Structure remained at night. Doubt crept in. She lay awake in her apartment, city lights blinking like watchful eyes. She replayed choices, imagined easier paths. Each time she returned to the same truth. Trust once broken rarely returned. She had chosen to build something that could last. Jordan Reed called unexpectedly. He had taken a role at a nonprofit focused on ethical supply chains. "You changed the conversation," he told her. "That matters." Grace thanked him and ended the call, feeling the weight of leadership settle deeper. Inspiration did not pay legal fees. Discipline did. The suit advanced to mediation. Naomi Price appeared across the table, composed as ever. "You could end this," Naomi said. "A settlement. Quiet, fast." Grace considered the offer. Settlement meant certainty. It also meant concession. "No," she said. "We'll proceed." Naomi studied her, then nodded once. "As you wish." The hearing unfolded under bright lights. Grace testified without flourish, explaining decisions, citing data, emphasizing duty. Her voice did not shake. The mediator recommended dismissal. The plaintiffs withdrew. The city moved on. That evening, Grace visited her mother, bringing fried catfish and coleslaw. They ate on the porch, summer thick in the air. "You look tired," her mother said. "I am," Grace admitted. "But it's honest tired." Her mother smiled. "That's the good kind." The final evaluation approached. Naomi scheduled the review. Grace prepared reports, not speeches. On the morning of the meeting, she wore a simple suit and walked through the lobby as employees nodded, some smiling openly now. Trust had grown roots. Inside the boardroom, Naomi summarized findings. Performance exceeded benchmarks. Governance reforms held. Brand value rose. Employee retention improved. Community partnerships delivered returns beyond projections. Naomi closed her folder. "The conditions have been met," she said. "Control transfers effective immediately." The room exhaled. Grace felt the moment land, solid and earned. She thanked the board, brief and sincere. Outside, the city waited, indifferent but attentive. Control did not change Grace. It clarified her. She announced a leadership council, decentralized authority, codified transparency. She declined a compensation increase. She invested in training and fair sourcing. The empire became a platform, not a pedestal. That night, alone again, Grace stood by the window and allowed herself one quiet moment of pride. Not for the wealth, but for the choice. Freedom had cost her comfort. It had given her purpose. Foreshadowing, lingered a reminder that power invited new tests. Grace welcomed them. She had learned how to stand. The first thing Grace did after the transfer of control was nothing anyone expected. She closed her office door, turned off the lights, and sat alone in the quiet. No calls, no cameras, no strategy, just silence. Power had arrived, but peace had not followed. She needed to understand what she had truly inherited. The city outside moved as always, horns, footsteps, ambition scraping against concrete. Grace remembered the girl who cleaned offices at night, who memorized other people's success while scrubbing their floors. That girl still lived inside her. She made sure of it. Weeks passed. The empire stabilized. Stockholders calmed. The lawsuit faded from memory. Grace declined interviews, choosing substance over spotlight. She focused on systems ethical sourcing, fair wages, transparent supply chains. Small decisions. Big ripples. One afternoon, a package arrived without a return address. Inside was a leather-bound journal, worn soft at the edges. A note followed, written in Naomi Price's precise hand. "He wanted you to have this if you proved yourself." Grace opened the journal slowly. Raymond Holloway's handwriting filled the page's plans. Regrets, calculations, fears. Not a monster. Not a hero. A man shaped by hunger and control, by the belief that love weakened leadership. Then she reached the final entry. If Grace is reading this, then she chose truth over comfort. That was the test. The empire was never the inheritance. Grace closed the book, breath unsteady. The final revelation landed not as shock, but as release. The story she had chased her whole life finally made sense. She had not been chosen for blood. She had been chosen for values. That evening, Grace walked the city alone. Bought a hot dog from a street cart, sat on a bench, and watched people pass. Freedom felt ordinary. That was its power at home. She called her mother. "Come stay with me," Grace said. Not as rescue. As invitation, her mother agreed. Days later, Grace stood before the company for the first time as full leader. No podium, no applause track. Just people. "I didn't inherit this," Grace said. "I earned it, and so will every leader after me." The room responded with something deeper than applause-belief. Faraway competitors recalculated. The empire had changed shape. It was no longer easy to attack. It was grounded. Grace returned to her office and placed Raymond's journal in the drawer beside her own notes. Past and present aligned. The city outside kept breathing. Inside, Grace finally did too. The city did not announce the ending. It never did. Endings revealed themselves quietly, in the way fear loosened its grip, in the way mirrors stopped asking permission. Grace woke before sunrise on the day the final chapter settled into place. Her mother slept in the guest room down the hall, breathing steady, safe. That sound alone was worth every battle. Grace made breakfast eggs toast. Coffee strong enough to hold a promise, and stood by the window watching the city stretch awake. For the first time in years, the future did not feel like a debt. At headquarters, the atmosphere had changed. People no longer whispered when she passed. They greeted her by name, not title. Trust had replaced survival. Grace moved through the building with purpose, not urgency. Listening, correcting, encouraging. Leadership, she had learned, was not volume. It was consistency. She convened the final town hall of the year. No cameras, no scripts. She spoke about accountability, about mistakes she had made, about lessons the company had paid for and learned from. She announced a profit-sharing plan, expanded healthcare coverage, and long-term community investment. Numbers mattered, but people remembered fairness longer than profits. Applause filled the room, raw and real. Grace did not smile until it faded. She wanted them to know this was serious work, not celebration. Later that afternoon, Naomi Price requested a brief meeting. Naomi looked different, now less guarded, more human. "You changed the outcome," Naomi said. "Not just for the company." Grace nodded. "That was always the point." Naomi hesitated, then extended her hand. Grace shook it. No victory speech. No revenge. Closure. That night, Grace returned to the diner near the freeway. It's the same booth where her mother had once guarded painful truths. She ordered a cheeseburger and fries, ate slowly, watching families argue gently. Strangers laugh, lives unfold without headlines. This was the world she had fought to stay connected to. A memory rose, Grace mopping floors, staring at reflections of success that did not see her. She smiled softly. The girl had not disappeared. She had grown. Months passed. The empire thrived, not through spectacle, but through trust. Analysts wrote case studies. Schools invited Grace to speak. She declined most offers, choosing impact over image. When she did speak, she told the truth plainly. Wealth did not save her. Choice did. One evening, Grace sat at her desk and opened her own journal, writing the final line of a chapter she had survived. Freedom is not inherited. It is claimed. She closed the book, turned off the light, and walked into the city that had once ignored her. It did not ignore her anymore, but more importantly, she no longer needed it to notice. The story did not end with a billion-dollar empire. It ended with a woman who could finally breathe.